Hello, everyone, and happy holidays. Thank you for joining us on this special end of the year episode of Tried and True, a podcast hosted by Delaware Warmachine. I am one of your hosts, Erica, and joining me is...
Hi, I'm Andy.
It's been over a month since our last episode. We've had a few exciting events after Nova Open, including our 3v3 local Steamroller tournament, Susquehanna Scuffle, and our 100-point Secret Santa Steamroller, the Winter Argus Invitational. Congratulations to Steve Rabideau for coming in first and having Storm Legion hit the Delaware Warmachine SR plaque for the first time. We wanted to thank all of our listeners for sharing their time and feedback with us. Special thank you to More Than Dice for hosting the podcast. Shout out to our patrons on Patreon for supporting our projects. Paul has been working on some incredible original new thematic tables that will be premiering at Nova Open 2025. So just to talk about the outline of this podcast, we have some special guests coming to the show, both from SFG and Privateer Press. We're going to discuss some upcoming plans for SR25, the January update, some big army changes, and then we have some questions from our patrons on Patreon. So without further ado, let us welcome our guests. Please welcome Jamie Perkins to Tried and True. For those who may not know the kitchen table legend, could you please tell us a bit about yourself and what you do at SFG?
Yes, indeed. Thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure. So I've been a fan of playing Warmachine for over a decade at this point, but I also have worked for Steamforge Games for coming up on 9 years now. I've got a variety of experience of game development for miniature games like Guild Ball and God Tier, but worked on a variety of board games for Steamforge as well, like Dark Souls, Monster Hunter World, Devil May Cry. So I've had a hand in on most of the games that Steamforge Games have made. I don't work directly on Warmachine most of the time. I tend to serve as an advisor to the people that are already working on it and as an extra sort of experienced point of view. But yeah, I'm here to talk about what we've been doing with Steamroller with Loren.
Thank you so much. It's really good to have you. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us today. We wanted to welcome back Loren Lauer. For those who may not know who you are, could you please tell us a bit about yourself and what you do at Privateer?
Oh, sure. My name is Loren Lauer, she, her. I have been working with Privateer Press for going on 8 years now. I am the organized play and playtest developer. So that means I manage Steamroller for the most part, as well as make sure that our models come out on the highest quality that you can. Just working with the playtesters and other contractors to bring you great games.
Thank you, Loren, for coming back on the show. Thank you again, Jamie, for coming on. Now, without further ado, let's get into the meat of this episode. So section 1, we're going to look at how does Steamforge Games and Privateer Press feel about the current Steamroller 2024 packet. And Andy, do you mind leading us off?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do some hard-hitting questions. So this is to either of you guys. The current packet was a big departure from the Mark III style packets. What do you think were some of the most successful changes that were made when you compare this packet to the older versions?
I guess I'll take that one. So the biggest changes are army variety, just the way it's encouraged different types of lists to show up. The type of lists we see now are much different than the older style packets we were seeing at the beginning of Mark IV. I've really liked how the movement elements have been encouraging this kind of push back and forth to the center. And I think the overall most successful change was just the inclusion of scenario terrain. Lots of good feedback on how that's worked. People love the physicality of taking actual physical items in the play space and claiming them as their own, and that's worked out real well.
We've definitely got a lot of positive feedback about the amount of the table that's being used for this scenario packet compared to the old one, because I know in Mark III it could be very much 2 feet by 2 feet in the middle of the table is where all the models are.
Yeah, that was something I definitely wanted to make sure we were using the entire board space. 4x4 is a large space, and if you're not utilizing all of it, you're wondering why you're not just playing on a 3x3, and that would be a very different Warmachine, I think, if it was just a 3x3 table.
May I just ask a really quick follow-on to that?
Sure.
What has been your feedback on the 5-point versus 3-point difference?
Sorry, you're going to be more specific about that one, Erica.
Oh, sorry. So in previous Steamroller, it was first player who got 5 over the other
Oh,
player, and now the other player gets an
sure.
opportunity to
Yeah,
score back.
that is mathematically it's more or less the same based on how things score at this point. You're still having to push ahead by 5 on your turn most times for your opponent to get. There's most scenarios have like 2 points you can easily farm in some way. So now you really do have to push ahead by 5 to get past the easily farm stuff. So you're not having to like interfere with your entire opponent's half of the board. So it's about the same, I would say, mathematically. We haven't had a lot of feedback that this has been interfering with anybody or anything like that. So
I think from my 2 cents on that, from an experience perspective, one of the things that's really been achieved by that change in how you win on scenario is that it always feels like it kind of comes down to a nail biting end in the game a lot more often now. If you've got someone who's pushing for a heavy scenario win in previous Steamroller packets, they get that scenario win, and it would almost feel like a caster kill. You've pushed the boat out for it, you've got it, and the game's done, and we're finished. Whereas now you've got SR24 and 25 packets that are feeling like you go for a heavy scenario win, and then you're trying to entrench yourself and protect your warcaster because you know that a last ditch assassination is at least coming at you the following turn, and it leads to a really nail biting end a lot of the time to the game. So I find that pretty exciting personally.
I know I was stuck in Mark III brain for early on in this packet where I would push really, really hard on scenario and then watch my entire army melt. And if they could cling to the cling on for scenario, I don't have anything left. So I had to rebalance how I play the game, not throwing as much stuff away and playing a little bit more conservatively to handle this packet.
the game is just more lethal now too. So
Oh yeah.
yeah.
So from that perspective, where do you think that this 2024 packet missed the mark on what you guys were going for when it comes to the style of the Steamroller packet? Are there things that you guys wanted it to do that it didn't accomplish?
There was some movement mechanics that were kind of janky. Like my favorite part of working on the next packet was returning to some of my favorite scenarios and just tuning up the mechanics so that it flows better. And some of the scenarios, the movement mechanics just were pointless, and we got to replace those scenarios. And then like some of them were just static completely. So I didn't feel like some of those worked. Like Recon, wasn't a big fan of Recon myself, or Invasion. I'm trying to remember.
Invasion to me was very snowbally. As soon as somebody starts dragging stuff away, it can snowball into a win very quickly.
Yeah. So I guess it's obvious we're not going to be seeing Invasion or Recon Mark IV in the new.
Write it down, everybody. It's probably not the most exciting answer, but it's an important part of it still, which is the presentation of how the Steamroller packet looks on paper, or digitally in this case. So we're going to be doing some revision of things like iconography of how the scenario objectives appear and how they look on the maps, just to make it a little bit easier to follow. And there's some other elements of SR24, 25 that we've cleared up as well in terms of what order the information comes out in. Because it felt a little bit like in SR24 you kind of had to dig through like a lot of TO information, and often as a player you're going, why do I need to read this? Skip past the pages, get to the scenarios I want to read and things like that. So there's some small admin
especially
things
as
looked up.
Especially as a TO, it was interesting to have to read through what felt like a novel a lot of times to remind myself of how each scenario worked, because they were very different from scenario to scenario.
Right. So we've taken some time to try and clear up the admin and make them a little bit easier to use. Well, from a usability standpoint as well.
Like I'm just looking at this in the we don't have it laid out quite yet, but I think the old packet there was 20 pages of text before we got to the scenarios. Now it's page 6, yes. So much easier to find the actual scenarios. It will be in the app and in the PDF eventually. So that'll be hopefully helpful for players in game to get their information smoother and easier.
It was definitely helpful. I don't remember at what point during Mark IV when the Steamroller section was added to the app. I think that was a good addition.
Yes, I was very excited to get that in there. That was, making everything accessible from one point was a big push. We were trying to get everything uniformly in there, and I'm excited to, improve the usability of it still.
So, still discussing Steamroller 2024. The introduction of objectives was a big change. Any new objectives in SR25, or will the actual objective objects stay the same? And what about flags?
So we have made one major change around objectives and flags and stuff. But kind of becomes three. We dropped the 30 millimeter objective from SR25. When reviewing the amount of scenarios and other elements we wanted to push, we just found we were just using it less and less, and just kind of to bring it. One of the big pushes is like a standardization, and so we've turned the 30 millimeter objective into the cache, basically. So the 30 millimeter objectives that you have physically can still be used as caches. The flags will also be moving to 30 millimeter bases. So if you have a flag, you can just stick it on a 30 millimeter base. It's not a big deal. But future products will have that adjustment made to them. We do have plans to release, Jamie, correct me if I'm wrong, new objective sets.
You're correct. Yep. Yeah. And just to dig into that one a little bit more, just because people playing Warmachine are kind of used to very specific base sizes, 30, 40, 50, now 80 as well, and added to that, and then 120s as well for huge bases. The 20s kind of felt like they came a little bit out of left field and they're not used very often. So part of it is moving them to 30 millimeters to standardize them across the range. Often people who've played Warmachine for a little while tend to have a spare 30mm base or so. If you need to, you can take your existing caches and flags and just stick them on 30mm bases, or create new objectives if you'd like to. But there's a standardization element to that.
I mean, most of the time, right, I don't know if flags still work this way, but most of the time the base size and the flag doesn't really even matter, because the flag is sort of immaterial, and is it still the same that it's going to be a piece of terrain that that the flag becomes?
Yeah.
Okay.
And there's very limited instances where you'll see it be used as an objective itself. It's just a safety net, basically. So even that, not super important. Well, I wouldn't say important, but you're not going to see that very often. So.
All right, let's start talking about the more stuff about the new packet. So the current packet is designed and relevant for 75 and 100 points. Is there plans for a dedicated 75 point, 50 point, any smaller packets for the competitive portion of Warmachine, or is this new packet just going to be for 100 points?
So the intent for this packet that's releasing in January, it's going to be suggesting 100 points. But the work we've done on it, I feel like it works for 75 points as well. We are suggesting people play this at 100. You'll see that a lot of the events will be run at 100, I believe. But I think it still works at 75. Jamie, I can let you speak about other packets that are coming out.
Yeah, this one we'll talk a little bit more broadly about, because we're sort of getting a little bit further into the future, but it's still an objective to be able to work on organized play that's not just specifically linked to competitive play, and that will include smaller point sizes as well. So we're aware Warmachine exists. We like Warmachine, but we also want to have a look at a little bit more organized play support for things you can do at home for narrative games, for things you can do at home for smaller point size games, and there's slightly more sort of fun elements and scenario elements to play with that aren't just playing Steamroller repeatedly.
I desperately want people to know that the Battle Forges in the app and the Black Tide campaign are really fun. We put a lot of work into that. I hope you guys are enjoying it too, because those are made for all kinds of different point levels. So
yeah, the Battle Forge stuff has been popular, especially late in the year when a lot of the competitive stuff starts to die down, and open play night is still open play night. So we'll just break out just a random Battle Forge game or a Warmachine game to play at lower points.
Great. It's one of those weird things. That's one of the things we get the least feedback about, like the Battleforge and stuff. But I'm glad to hear that people are enjoying it, especially in the wind down section of the year.
Personally, I would love it. This is just my own selfish thing. If they could be tied into any sort of lore that's going on currently, I think you'd get people more willing to play them as they come out, or it's your Battleforge happens as a story comes out, something like that.
I don't know much about the most recent stuff because Jason's taken a turn on that, but I know a lot of the earlier stuff was like it was planned out that there was this whole section where people were marching up the mountain for like the big fight with Blightergast. I don't know how much that was written into the scenario, but that was at least the intent. But yeah,
I know.
I love tying that to lore. So
yeah, I know it's hard to keep everything in sync, right? When you're developing.
Yes, yeah.
When you're developing things to work as well as developing, you're trying to make sure lore comes out at a pace as well.
Okay, so our next question is, are you happy with the quantity of scenarios, 6 being in this year's packet, in competitive Steamroller?
Yeah. I think 6 is a great number. Mostly because when you have these elements that have moving parts or scenario-specific rules, I think more than that is adding a bit more cognitive load. And this year we've kept 3 of the old scenarios. We've tweaked them in like improved them with mechanics wise, but they're more or less the same. And so there's that like, oh, I remember these from last year, so I have that knowledge. There's 3 new ones. I'm adding knowledge about that, but keeping that complexity down to a healthy number lets become more intuitive. Like, oh, I remember playing this scenario. I know how it works. So I think 6 is a great number. I don't know. What do you guys think?
It's easy to roll a d6 when you get to the table, right? That makes sense.
Yep.
I wanted to ask, would you think is the major philosophical difference between this new packet and the current packet? Like, what are you trying to push more for players, and what are you trying to discourage?
So one thing I think me and Jamie both wanted to push in this scenario is that you'll see there are more 50mm objectives because we want to see more cohorts, more battle engines, more colossals. And we want them to be important. If people only want to bring one of those to the table, we want that to be a huge risk to your scenario game. So that was one of the philosophy changes we've changed. Another one we've been working on is uniformity and consistency. We've talked about that with the 30mm bases already. But we streamlined and made more uniform the contesting and objecting areas. They should be identical across everything. You even contest caches now, so that you can't score cache unless you've cleared out the space around it.
You can't sneak caches away anymore. That's going to change some stuff up.
And to kind of make them more important, caches are now 2 points. So putting that work in will get you more.
Now that's something that you actually have to actively defend. That's cool.
Yeah. Contesting and scoring the scenario terrain and the objectives are both 3 inches now.
So scoring is all uniform. It's not 2 or 3.
Yep. But you'll also see in scenario terrain, you have to be inside of a forest now to score it, not in that aura. Forests don't have an aura. Only like obstructions have that kind of 3-inch aura.
Gotcha.
So if you're by a wall, that will have the aura, but if it's a forest, you have to be in the forest to take it.
So enterable terrain effectively becomes a zone, whereas non-enterable terrain effectively is played like the Mark IV packet, the 2024 Mark IV packet.
Yeah, that's the way to put it.
Is it like fully in, or I just touch my toes in and I'm contesting or scoring?
You know what? I have to double check that because it's been a while since I've looked at that specifically. Looks like within.
Next question is, current Steamroller has some wide scenarios and only really one that encourages the old style mosh pit in the middle of the table. Using the whole table looks great from a spectator perspective, but can put certain armies at a disadvantage. Should we expect to see more of the same in 2025?
A lot of those armies are built around the idea that they are much stronger together. So I understand the feeling that like spreading out hurts them, but they are balanced up on that point. So we will see more spread out stuff, but we will also see more things that will help defend the army. There's a new scenario called Trench Warfare that basically creates 2 lines across the table where you have basically an artificial trench that lets you walk up the board. The scenario elements themselves generate cover and blast resistance. So you'll be spread out necessarily by the scenario, but also the scenario itself will help you in your zones about getting shot off the table. If that makes sense. But other changes, we are keeping things in that spread out kind of area. We do like that and seeing that on the table.
That sounds similar. We went to a Black Tide Steamroller down in Maryland earlier this year, and I remember there was a scenario like that with a long trench network on one side. We thought that was really cool.
Yeah, we wanted to kind of recreate that feeling of a no man's land in trenches while not requiring any specific terrain. So that was kind of the inspiration behind that scenario.
All right, now for the annoying part. Payload is a bit of a touchy subject for players and TOs alike, to the point where a lot of us stopped really running the current version of Payload because it's so hard to balance the table around it being viable from both sides. So, along with the wide scenarios, has helped discourage list building that includes larger battle groups. I know you guys touched on that earlier, and I really, really support the more 50 mils because Payload was one of those ones that were really dependent on 50 mils. So, are you able to say just how many 50 mils are in the next packet, and if Payload's getting changed?
Okay, we'll start with the Payload question. So Payload is seeing some small changes. I know people would like to see Payload go away, but other people have really enjoyed Payload. It's maybe one of the most you love it or hate it scenarios.
I like the idea of Payload.
Yeah. So one of the biggest rubs was that if you delivered your payload, that was such a swing that it basically decided the game. And so we actually reduced the amount of points delivering the payload gives you. So that's less of a rub. It's still going to be very impactful at the end of the game, but it's not going to decide the game in one moment. So if one person's unbalanced terrain, we want the terrain to be unbalanced because that second player choice is important. But also we don't want someone to be so overwhelmingly crushed that they just lose because of the terrain too, right? So we try to leave in that element of, maybe it's going to be hard to deliver the payload, but also it's not going to be the end all be all in that scenario. So it also saw some changes to clean up the language to make it easier to move the pieces. We've added a lot of maze so that if you forget, you don't have to jump backwards in time to figure out where the thing moved because it was must before. Little changes like that.
Mm-hmm. Just a real quick question. I know currently Wolves at Our Heels has that moving kill box, and Two Fronts does not even have a kill box.
Oh, well, kill box is standard on everything now. You won't actually see in individual scenarios it says kill box anymore because the kill box rule itself earlier in the document says, hey, this is standard in everything. That way it doesn't get missed.
Okay.
The Wolves advance is still in Wolves, so you're still going to get the advancing kill box in that one scenario. But
I am guilty of forgetting that multiple times and handing my opponent 2 points.
It is difficult. It is a scary thing coming up behind you, and it is easy to miss. But yeah. There was another changes to Wolves. Oh, the race mechanic in Wolves changed while we're at it. It's no longer furthest up the board because that can be a little fiddly to measure. We got a lot of feedback about that. So it's the first to pass a certain point on the board. And since everyone scores together, both things are moving together. That might happen at the same time, so you get no points. But also that might, it's very clear who passes that line when. So it's much easier to track and score that.
I can agree. The fiddliness of that measurement can encourage arguments at the table, and I like that change can clear that up to basically say, to standardize it, to say, oh, okay, this is the line to gain. We can go back and measure exactly how many times this moved to verify.
I admit
I moved exactly 3 inches this many times.
I was in love with the old method, and I think it was one of the more. I had to humble myself and accept it when every playtester was like, "Hey, this should probably change," and I go, Yeah, if you're all saying it, you're probably right. I accept this. That I can be wrong with scenarios. And we improved that up. We tweaked it up.
All right, you got anything else for Steamroller Lady, or you want to move on to the exciting part, the January updates?
January update. I didn't have any other. Oh, actually, I do. For Steamroller, on the subject of terrain. So, one of my favorite things about War Machine Mark IV were like scatter terrain and all the different types of terrain that your team came up with. Are there any new terrain types that are possibly coming out, or any changes to some old favorites?
So, um, gosh, that's a very big question. So no, we're not in this update. We're not introducing any new terrain. I'll say that. We are going to be saving that maybe for a future thing. I'll say that. How about that?
Sounds good. Jamie, did you have anything you wanted to add before we move off of Steamroller 25?
Nope, I think that's pretty good. I think it covers a lot of the big swinging parts.
Oh, I do want to add one more thing. I'm sorry if that's
No,
all right.
of course, please.
I know something else that was asked for a lot was a setup and deployment chart for order of operations on things. I want to confirm that we did add that. That is in there. So hopefully that will make it very clear for everybody what order things happen in.
Nice. Love the quality of life changes.
Yeah. That was another big focus for us was quality of life changes. Now that we've had the basic setup for this last year, this next year was just improving on everything. So,
Are we allowed to set up scenario before we roll off?
let me consult the chart. You determine scenario either by the TO or randomly. So if the TO decides the scenario, I guess they can set the scenario up first.
I would say it this way: there's nothing saying that you can't set the scenario up beforehand. So if you would like to set up a scenario beforehand, choosing sides, you may.
I left it open so the TO gets to decide such things.
Yeah. I always do it because I have such a hard time visualizing it without on the table. So even if I have to reset it up after rolling off, it just helps me.
I have full on lost games at tournaments because I didn't check what the scenario was going to do on either side of the table. So it's
another thing, like we don't want to like force TOs to have all of the objectives, right? One of the things we were told while making Mark IV was that, hey, it's very hard for me as a new TO to get community going because I'm expected to have all of these resources. Some game stores require them to have all the terrain, all back then zones, flags, all of this themselves. We built this so that a new TO could say, hey, players, really objectives are your responsibility. Bring your objectives. We can set it up during game, but that way the TO doesn't have to pay out of pocket for this big part of the game. We want that flexibility in there.
Yeah, I really like it when the players take it upon themselves to make their, the only thing about the objective is the base size, so they just make fun stuff on that base that pertains to their army, which is really cool.
As someone who made all of their own objectives back in the day, yes, that was encouraging that exactly.
I was about to say, a little anecdote from the Guild Ball days is we actually used to run competitions for who had the best goal design when they came to a tournament. So having the best objective design seems like a really fun thing that we could do for events.
Oh, I love that.
But it's not going to earn you points, don't worry.
No, it will not earn you tournament points, but it might earn you a prize.
Yeah, no scenario points for pretty.
Now, I love challenges and things like that at either a Steamroller tournament or convention that hits the hobby side, because I feel like a lot of events focus on the gameplay, and the hobby is so much more than that. And the community, all the things that they come out with, how creative they are with kit bashing and all that. I love it. So that's awesome.
Yeah, when I started playing the game back in Mark 1, it wasn't necessarily because of the rules, because the models are so pretty and I enjoyed painting them. So now I'm helping make the rules. So, people come from all different ways of the hobby, different ways, and it's important to encourage all of it.
All right. So if nobody has anything else to add for SR 25, we're going to move into one of our last sections here on the January update and big army changes. To start us off, question 1, how do you feel about the landscape from just a Mark IV army perspective? How do the Mark IV armies compare, and are you happy with the current faction balance?
So obviously, you know, balance is an active activity, like year to year, meta to meta. Um, there are some things we definitely wanted to see pulled up, a couple of things that need to be brought down, but overall, like balance wise, we're very happy that coming into a very different edition, things are as balanced as they are. So we feel like we're doing pretty good there. We know there's some nails that need to get hit done, smacked down, and some things that need to be brought up, but I think we accomplished that really well with the January update. I want to say this was about twice as much as last year. SFG really encouraged us to the design team to go hog wild, and we worked our little hearts out on this.
So we share a gaming space with a 40K group, and one of the things, competitively speaking, that's always been a highlight for me is you could take a sample tournament from anywhere in the world, and your top 5 armies are always different, and that's such a strong argument for the balancing that you and your team do. So kudos. It's really cool to see. Even we see that with our Steamroller plaque, right? We have so many different armies up there. So that's really cool.
I was very happy you guys just had that Storm Legion player get on there. We have so many people telling us that Storm Legion needs help, and they do, and they're going to get it. But even when they're not doing their best, like you still have players out there winning tournaments with them. So
I mean, that cadre did just come out too, so that probably helps them a lot.
It probably helps them a little bit.
All right. How do you feel about legacy armies right now? Some of these legacy themes are considered really strong, especially with a lot of the new Merc models that are coming out. If they can be included in those, while some of the other themes are kind of ignored by the player base, nobody really plays them. It's a really big catalog of models and themes and everything like that. How do you figure out what to do with this large catalog of things that still need balance?
Oh, sure. Just first, I want to make sure we have our terms correct. We're talking armies of legacy or legend, right? The prime
Prime Legacy, correct?
Yeah, Prime.
Or if it's called something different, I know it as Prime Legacy. The 2 armies for each old faction that are in Prime.
Okay. Yeah. So it is a very big project. We start in July collecting feedback, both from playtesters and from people who send in emails, and through the app. We spend a lot of time analyzing it, and we definitely get. There is an effect, like if no one's playing an army and no one's talking about an army, we do have a harder time, addressing problems because we don't know of problem. There's so much stuff we can't know of a problem if no one tells us, right? And this year we got to go beyond our rule of 5 changes and really bring up some of the armies that were struggling and at the bottom. And we just wanted to other changes just to shake things up a little bit and maybe change a little playstyle. We wanted to make sure this year one of the biggest changes we did is that there are several tools we wanted every army to have access to, even if it's only on a caster, so that there's always an option for seeing through stealth or clouds, which is a big every army had access to something like that now, be that legacy or modern Mark IV.
All right, you heard it, everybody. Send in your feedback. It gets read. It's a little late for this one, I'm sure. But,
a little late, yeah. All of our changes are locked at this point. But I do want the player base to know that we do read everything. So we do care about what you guys have to say.
Okay, so our next question, we're talking about our armies of legend. Are there any major changes coming for them? Additional leaders, everyone's always asking, or an expansion of their army catalog?
So we don't have any changes to their army catalog. One of the reasons for that is we know people have adjusted their collections based on the selections that are out there, and as these models get harder and harder to get, we're becoming increasingly aware that if we make a change like that, people might not even be able to get the model they want to make their army important now. We might introduce something that becomes army defining, and then we don't want people to feel obligated to buy a $500 thing on the aftermarket, right? So we've kind of decided that we're probably for the most part done adding new things to those armies. But that doesn't say we aren't paying attention to them. Like, I have how many pages here? I have 33 pages of changes in my notes here. So we did not short them on attention or love.
It's okay. My Paladins of the Wall will still be pretty on the shelf.
And it's always sad, but like unlimited or Jamie, you're gonna have to remind me what unlimited's called these days.
Unlimited. Yeah, like
unlimited? Oh, I thought we changed the name.
No, sorry, you are right. It's just become that was it. So it's Prime Legacy armies are now going to be called Armies of Legend, and Unlimited is changed to Legacy. So that is the true Legacy stuff now. That's
yeah. And while we didn't touch many Legacy models, we do. That's still a way to play the game. So you can still play with your Paladin on the Walls. We do encourage that.
Oh yeah, we do that for any narrative style stuff, any Battleforge stuff. That's usually fully unlimited.
It's worth noting that there are some changes that will impact those models in Legacy/Unlimited, what do you know it as? That's mainly because global changes that have impacted a model that's in Prime, and there's a model in Unlimited/Legacy that has that rule as well, so they'll be affected by that. But there aren't any changes that are specifically for those models, if that makes sense.
There was a change to Electrify, and it affected all of the Nemos. So yeah.
On that topic, can you give us an example for this pass that for a model or unit that was really, it wasn't hitting the mark and you were having a really hard time iterating on it till you were happy with it?
Yes. The Wyvern.
What do you mean it doesn't do enough now or too much?
It's more along the lines of the fact that the Wyvern, so the spoilers, is that the Wyvern does not have Warping Winds in the January update. The Shadowflame Shard still has access to Warping Winds, it's just on another model. And trying to account for the sort of the power balance within, not just within the army, but also on model by model basis of where exactly Warping Winds goes, was a super interesting puzzle to work out.
Yeah, I think Warping Winds hit 5 different models during the January update.
Right.
Before finally settling where it is. So definitely there was a Warping Winds shell game happening.
How about you, Loren? Do you have a model or unit that was really difficult to hit the mark on?
Oh, I mean, the model that had the most push around, other than that, may have been Big Pig. But I think the one that I think is most interesting is probably my brain is always dropping words out of my head. I'm sorry. What is the Zephyr? The Zephyr. I'm sorry. The Zephyr changed quite a bit. And it got weirder and weirder, but in a very interesting way with every change. I think that one was probably closer to my heart than the Big Pager changes, just because of how very interesting it's became. I think it's going to surprise a lot of people.
Oh, that's awesome. So on the flip side of that, is there an example of a model or unit that just made sense and fell into place immediately when it was proposed?
You have to give me a second to think about that one.
They're weirdly harder to remember because they happen straight away, and then you're just like, oh, that's a standard, move on to the next one. You tend to kind of spend most of your kind of, brain budget, I suppose, or on the stuff that's, oh, this is going to take more time. So that's the stuff that sort of comes to the surface more easily because you spent more time working on it, if that makes sense.
I know which one it is. It was we very early on changed Captain Firequill, and we got feedback on it, and one playtester suggested probably the most interesting change, and all of dev was like, "Oh my god, that's perfect." Captain Firequill ended up with Fortune Hunter as the gun-stealing, cheating duelist that he is. Of course, he would be the perfect candidate to have a role like that. He is the one hunting named characters, taking their named pistols and adding them to his collection. that rule felt very natural and very good on him. In addition to things like broadside, he's a very different caster now. Firequill changed an awful lot. It's very interesting now. He got Repo 3, an ability people are becoming more familiar with now that Kane's released. He got Headshot. He lost Energizer, which was, I know, a big way for him to get extension on his threat. But he picked up Broadside and Fortune Hunter, which I think are pretty big changes to his kit. Just the ability to throw out volumes of attacks or get another critical Blood Boon shot if you failed your first attempt at it, or a big spray, however. But he still has the ability to get out with Repo 3.
Yeah, that's a pretty big, almost rework for him, almost.
Yeah. A couple Mark IV casters saw things like that, but I think he was my favorite change. Not just because I play Brine Bloods or anything, but no bias here.
Hey, maybe we can use that for the battle report, our first 2025 battle report. New Firequill, Andy.
No, we're getting Bugatti Bum on the channel first.
Jamie, do you have a favorite change?
I'm looking through them. I have several favorite changes that I really enjoy in here. I'll pick out one of them. So I played a lot of Khador Wintercore earlier in 2024. I'm playing a lot of Shadow Flame Shard now, but there's a really cool change that's making me look back at Wintercore going, I want to play this one again, which is I can't pronounce the proper name. I just know him as Boris.
Buryusk.
Thank you. Is how. So there's a couple of things here. So we cut Unnatural Darkness to become Veil of Mists as a spell. So I think that means it's more, you can place it anywhere in your control area now rather than centered on a model. Is that the difference that works there, Loren?
I do believe that's the difference, yeah.
So added Arcane Precision, so isn't going to necessarily have to take Sentry Duty to have a problem with stealth anymore. And then also changes how the feat works as well. So it effectively just gives you boosted attack rolls like just all of the time, unless I'm reading it incorrectly. So how the wolf works the same as it did before. You destroy a model, another model in your battle group then gets to make an attack, move 2 inches to make an attack. It can only happen once per model, but now it's just boosted attack rolls across the board, I think.
Boosted all the time, rolls, not just during that attack. It's all attacks.
Yeah, boosted ranged attack rolls all the time. So there's going to be a lot. So even Boris's shots, which include then the critical effects of like arm piercing, etc. on there. There's a lot more interesting stuff going on. So there's
So whether the shot is a feat trigger or not a feat trigger, all of his cohort and himself get boosted ranged attack rolls.
Correct.
It's a nice little boost.
Can I actually kind of transition into another big change, kind of off of what Jamie said there?
Yeah, of course.
You mentioned Sentry Duty. Sentry Duty isn't a card anymore. That's another reason why all armies got access to things to help with stealth and stuff like that. We have reduced the amount of command cards that are available, period, by a great deal, both to kind of help people with that cognitive load we've talked about. We wanted to simplify things back down, so we were already starting to see a little bit of bloat there. And kind of make it so it's a little easier to know what your opponent can do with cards in their hand. There's not such a great, vast quantity of things they could have.
Are you able to go into any more detail about the card changes?
Well, that one's a big one. Savagery is gone. I know that's going to affect a lot of lists. It was, beyond just being complicated and always take in a lot of competitive lists, it was kind of trivializing a lot of the tough armies, and we didn't like that. So that had to go. We changed... See, I'm having Dev Brain. I can't remember what it used to be called. There used to be a card that gave focus to your leader. Power Swell. Power Swell is gone, but it changed to a new effect. I think it's called Lucky Penny. It gives you a focus, a fury, or even something like a corpse or a soul token. So
it's a combination of grave robbing and power swell into one thing?
Yeah. The reason behind that is because for a lot of casters, a soul or a corpse is the same thing as focus, and you could double up on that and we didn't want that
Duck at
specifically.
this.
Yes. So now, if you're trying to do that, you're sacrificing the focus in just getting the solar corpse.
Yeah, the biggest one for me was Blessing of the Gods. It felt like a very blunt object to be able to either gain magical weapons or ignore any sort of defensive tech you're trying to get into.
So Blessing of Gods is still in there, in part because it's an important tool for a new player, that when they encounter that armor 25 or whatever Centurion, that they have a solution, and it's not immediately a bad play experience for that new player. But also because a lot of armies, particularly armies of legend, don't have access to anything that are blessed or magical, and require a huge amount of time and playtest to go back to those factions and rework them so that they had a tool. You'd be surprised how easy it was to slot in, like, stealth tools to every army. We did that, and that was a lot of work, and we went, oh crap, we don't know, like, if we have the time to do something as big as Blessed. Like, especially, like, take First Army, Gravediggers, for instance. There's no good place for Blessed or upkeep removal, right? Like, they're a very low-tech faction. They don't have a bunch of mages on staff to deal with that. So we did leave Blessing of the Gods in.
And with regards to changes, what are the environmental variables that go into your decisions to change a model?
So some things that we try and keep in mind is that if this is a model, I mean, some things are like, we know people bought a lot of this and people care a lot about it, so we want to make sure that's still loved. Other things are, this is something that feels like it should work and doesn't work. We take a look at that and address it.
It's kind of easier to talk about the principles than it is to pull out an example in this instance. I suppose it's easy to talk about nerfed models, right? Because when you play against a model that you clearly feel is, when a player feels is clearly overpowered, then it can be frustrating if you're repeatedly seeing that model. We know, like, a key offender of this would be Kruger and Carver in the Warboar during 2024, for example. And so the instinct of player sometimes is to make a lot of changes, and this is suddenly not a problem for them anymore. But what it's hard to do is to make sure you sort of measure twice, cut once, in the sense that you don't want to kill the model, because you still want people to enjoy playing with Carver and the Warboar. They still need to be a model that people have paid money for. They want to be able to play with and use this. And some people will just genuinely enjoy the visuals. Someone enjoys playing Pharaoh generally, or just wants to play with them, enjoy the model. So you want to make sure that they're a model, when you're nerfing them, is nerfed to a degree where they're still playable, without going too far. You never want to just completely remove a model from play.
And like the Warboar, or the Carver in particular, like, we built a tool into him that we wanted every army to have access to, which was Eyeless Sight. And, like, we don't want to make that a terrible choice, but also we can't have it be the only choice, right?
Yeah. And so, for example, I think Kruger is another really interesting set of changes to me as well, because Kruger, I think a lot of people would be expecting to just see things removed from Kruger, but in some ways he got stronger. But I will quickly caveat that with also more expensive, so you're paying a fair cost for the package that you get now. But in some ways, it's a slightly stronger package than it was now. So I'm not leaving that one hanging, because that could panic some people. If we don't, it's probably worth talking about the changes there. Would you mind going through those, Loren, if that's all right?
Oh, sure, yeah. He costs 7 points now, which is significant. He's got 10 health, armor 17. He lost Burning Blight, and Howling Flames POW went up to 13, or down to 13. It doesn't say which way it went. I'm just telling you the changes I have looked.
Went up to 13. Burning Blight, was that the one that adjusted armor for being nearby, and was the attack rolls one and stuff as well? Living models got +1.
Yeah, that was the almost as hurts you as much as everyone else.
So because when you were close to living enemy models, you would effectively have a power 13 spray. So Kruger just has that innately. But Kruger obviously is an extremely powerful model, but you're paying 7 points. That's like extremely premium solo to be able to bring Kruger to the table.
Yeah. The important part is he still has 2 fully boosted Power 13 sprays.
Right. Exactly.
So he's worth 7 points. I agree.
And he still has his kablam, right? He could still teleport and poof.
Yeah.
It's really good.
Yeah, and losing Burning Blight, like, there were so many things, and with so many different armies that could stack the power swing, that definitely had to come off. Like, there was no pointing him correctly for that, I think. No bias.
I actually had a really funny... Kruger has been a problem for me as a Brian's player, just because he can erase whole units just from my table. So
That's right, everybody.
So I had a fun play with the shamans, who one shaman would sing for fire resistance, put up a little pond out, so that Kruger's now buffing my accuracy, and I just bonked him to death. We're getting into the tail end of the January update section here. I know in the past year, the number of cohorts required was one of the biggest changes that happened for the Steamroller packet. You only need, in order to build a 100-point army, 1 cohort model. This is big for both War Machine and Horde style factions, because War Machine style factions can sort of minimize their battle group, where Fury style factions sort of have a different decision making process to try and make that work. Are there any other major changes coming in the year in that style?
No, nothing that big. So, part of the reason we reduced the amount of cohorts was to open up list building and let more choices happen. But we did see a decrease in cohorts, which is another reason why we addressed it in the actual packet itself, where we're not using a stick to say, hey, bring 3 cohorts. We're using a carrot, go, hey, if you don't bring those cohorts, you're going to struggle on scenario, right? So we have that going on, but no other major structural changes or requirements to that degree.
Okay. Does that wrap us up for our questions, lady?
I think so, unless there's anything else Loren and Jamie wanted to mention about army changes.
Well, I was going to have a sneaky question for you two. I was going to have each one of you suggest a army that I might tell you a little bit of cool stuff, because we got to tell you our favorite factions and a little bit of stuff from it. So maybe we can suggest a change for some of your guys' favorite factions.
I think our biases are already well known, but go ahead, lady.
Like models, I guess, so I understand the question. Like models we had questions about changing, or
Just like if your favorite army is Dusk, I might tell you a cool Dusk change. That kind of thing.
So my question's going to be a little spicy.
Oh,
it comes from a place of love.
Okay.
Scarafell.
Okay.
So I purposely never picked up this caster just because Feet and TK, like, she just seemed like such an oppressive, negative play experience. And as somebody that goes to Steamrollers and tournaments that plays against this caster, it's just like,
sure,
sometimes it cannot be fun. She is a gorgeous model. She's absolutely beautiful. As a player, I would love to play her, but in her current state, I just don't think she's good for the game. It's
Right.
changing.
Now, I would say it's never as fun to talk about nerfs, right? But I feel like where we ended up with, yes, she's not as oppressive and awful as she was before, but she needed to change. I think everyone can agree to that. But we did rework her into a slightly different kind of caster, where she's much more battle group focused. And we did change the battle group, so I know people are like, but I don't like Edelines. Edelines are better. Don't worry about it. So she did lose telekinesis. But she gained Rhythm of War, so now she can move all of her battle group with Rhythm of War. She lost Doomsayer, but picked up Field Marshal Future Sight, so all of her Warjacks can boost after the fact now. She does see the future, so that makes a lot of sense. And she added Grave Wind, so that she still has a similar effect. She lost something else, I thought, to replace with Grave Wind. She did gain Grave Wind, though. So she herself lost Poltergeist. That's what it was. And so she got Grave Wind back to replace the spell she lost from Doomsayer, but got Grave Wind so she could put Poltergeist on whatever she wanted. That's what it was.
That's cool. Hey, for the record, as a player, I love Eidolon. And you know me, I love all gas, no brakes. We're still trying to make it work. We're still a work in progress. But no, that's cool that there's a different battle group style caster other than and comes from a place of love, Hazaroth. So that's cool. That's exciting.
Yeah, her feet also got tweaked a little bit. They still suffer the POW 10 magical damage roll. And models that are damaged are still pushed D3 inches away, but they're no longer knocked down. The knockdown part was, we think, the move too far, and so we removed that. But you still got the POW 10, you still got the push D3 away, so you still have that huge amount of control for scenario. So don't worry, she's not completely different, but still very powerful.
No, I love that. That sounds like a lot of fun. Thank you, Loren.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
All right, do I get one?
Yeah, please.
All right. I know we already. I'm a Brian's fanboy, but I want to throw you a little bit of a curveball. Are there any major updates to any of the Merc models that work for 2 armies?
Oh, the Merc models. Yes. What do I want to hit? Let's do Boomhowler. Because people want to use the Troll in the Troll faction, clearly. So his armor went up, but he did lose Unyielding, and he lost Relentless Charge. What he got instead was an action that a friendly target model or unit, if it's in range, they gain Force Barrier. So now he's yelling so strong that he's shouting bullets out of the sky for a model that you pick.
I love that.
It's called Shout It Out. It's an action.
It's an anti-shooting tech for Brian's. I like it. All right.
But also probably important to notice is that the Sky Bomber and Sky Raider, and by extension the other balloons in Brian's, got a rework because we changed what Propelled does. Because it was a problem, as I'm sure some people who've experienced
24-inch threat guns is a lot. Yeah,
it is a lot.
It's not so much that as well. If I could just jump in for a second, which is it's also to do with like the questions that the rule Propelled gave to the game as well, because it was kind of almost like an outside of. It was trying to create an almost outside of game states in the way that was so different. So we've changed Propelled work, so it conforms a lot more now to how movement in Warmachine stereotypically works.
It's just a standard speed 7 on the Sky Bomber and Sky Raider now, and they have Repo 5. But Propelled, the model can't aim, charge, or become knocked down still. So, Propelled is still doing something. It's just
so a little bit of flexibility was kind of removed from those models because of how flexible their threat ranges could be and how safe they could play.
Yeah. For the most part, they did see an increase to range. Like the heavy fire breathers range is different, and the heavy gun on the Raider is different. So they saw some other changes, but they also saw cost reductions. Like this, it very much changed how these models are played. So the change of Propel did affect other Brian's models, but I think for the better. And like you can still move your little pig balloon a great distance with the repo, so we're still doing great there.
I'm assuming the Brig got the same kind of changes.
Yeah. Yep.
I think at this point we've kind of hit we've hit at least one change for almost every Mark IV faction. So I think I'm just gonna throw one more in there, which is that we haven't talked about Orgoth yet. So I'm gonna throw in a buff and a nerf. We're gonna give it and we're gonna take it away. So the buff we're gonna talk about is gonna be the Galgast. So there's a couple of different things here. The miniature itself hasn't had a ton of changes. It's gone up its point of speed, and we've added repairable, so they're a nice quality of life. But the main thing that we needed to fix with the Galgast is it couldn't really access a lot of the cohort-friendly abilities within the faction. So specifically things like the Volcar Forge Master. So there's been a couple of global changes to those abilities so that they can now target the Galgast, because they can now target monstrosities. So you'll be able to use those in-faction buffs that are designed for Warjacks that can now be used on the Galgast as well.
I like that a lot, actually. You can make him a shield guard and force your opponents to make the decision to give him a focus or not give him a focus. I like that a lot.
Defensive measures and exorcism both can target cohort model instead of specifically Warjack. Yeah.
So there's some really nice quality life change for the Galgast. However, we have touched Windstorm in a global way. So instead of being fixed to whatever the control area of your caster is now, Windstorm has a fixed range, which is 8 inches from the caster. Still has the same effect as it did before, but it's now capped at 8 inches away from the casting model rather than whatever their control area was.
So still a very powerful effect on just a more concentrated area that you can...
Correct.
And like I said, we were Sea Raiders were designed around bricking up in some cases, and that they are balanced across, like, if you're split up, you're going to suffer for that, right? You make those hard choices. So that's another, we talked about spreading out earlier. And we want that to be felt, because in a lot of cases, we got a lot of feedback that people weren't feeling that for Windstorm on a lot of the casters. They weren't feeling that pressure of, oh, I'm spreading out so I don't get Windstorm. They seemed fine with spreading out in a lot of cases. So we pulled that.
Yeah, as somebody who plays into Orgoth a lot, it's a lot of the time where they felt they had relatively short threat ranges until they didn't, and their short threat ranges were basically making up for the fact that you really couldn't shoot them until they got there. So it felt like it's a very uphill attrition battle to try and weather their storm while they didn't really have to weather yours.
I want to add two things since we're talking about Windstorm and Garlgast. People have been talking about stacking Windstorm effects, and while we didn't change the wording to prevent that, because I think we still want the option if Dev decides it's important. What we did do is we changed the Dust Devil. The Dust Devil doesn't provide -3 range for your opponent anymore. If you're in it, you only suffer -3 range to shooting out of it. But if you're in it, you do gain +2 defense against shooting. So it's still a shooting defensive piece of terrain, but it's not this thing that's going to stack with Windstorm to give -6 anymore. It's not going to stack with Warping Winds or whatever the Signar one is. I can't remember at the top of my head.
Are there any of them that stack with Flying High currently, or?
So Windstorm changed to be Friendly Faction, so there's no Friendly Faction Flying High model.
Gotcha.
Crucible Guard is the only one I can think of.
Does someone in Crucible Guard have Windstorm? I'm trying to remember.
You're talking Legacy now. We're getting deep.
Yeah.
I guess Bennett does stack with it because Bennett has the range, but I think that's one of those instances where we're fine with that. Because, while we did change Rocketmen in general, I think, it makes sense there. When you're so far up in the air. And they're flimsy models anyway. So, but the Garlgast, there was a big loophole that I think was hurting the Garlgast, where certain Dusk models, for instance, could infinitely just kill them automatically.
Free stabs, plenty.
Free stabs forever. We did fix that loophole. Rage Fueled is now optional, so you don't have to gain that focus, which means it does close the loop.
Sorry, lady. No more infinite swords.
Yeah, you always got to keep the Bs intact. You're like, oh, are we about to take out a B? We're gonna start hitting on the other side now. Yeah.
Draining. Okay, I got it. I just worked out what that was. That's cool. I'm glad we closed.
Yeah. If we're talking about Garlgast, I think that's an important thing, because I think that was scaring some of them off the table.
I think it was relevant in the Ravener too.
It was relevant in the Ravener. Ravener had other uses, but the Garlgast being such an expensive model, that was a big.
So is that going to be uniform across all monstrosities, or just
it's a core rule change?
Okay.
Core rule change, yeah.
Importantly, I know there was, if we're talking about Orgoth, I know there was some clamoring for people to get the ability to empower the monstrosities. Is that still not a thing?
Yeah, the benefit you get from that of being a monstrosity is the fact your focus doesn't expire at the end of a turn. So it's meant to feel harder to get the focus on them in the first place. But once it's there, if you don't spend it, the fact that it gets to stick around is your replacement benefit.
That makes sense.
Did we have a change for Storm Legion? Like, I mentioned the Zephyr, but I didn't say what the Zephyr did. Should I say what the Zephyr does?
Go for it.
Alright, so the Zephyr went up to cost 9, which is going to sticker shock a lot of people. But what it did pick up is a lot of health. It's health 18 now. It has Carapace, so it's going to be very hard to shoot off the table. And it has Plasma Nimbus, so it's going to be very hard to hit off the table. And it gained a Trampling Hooves melee attack with crit knockdown, POW 14. So as it slams into your opponent, it's going to stick no matter where it is, engaged or not. It's going to stick around, providing that big ionization bonus. And be a huge thorn a mobile thorn at that, into your opponent's side.
So instead of hiding behind a house, it's now going to be shoved in your opponent's face and provide a very large bubble.
No, because
Yes.
it looks like a war chariot. Now it kind of fills that role versus like I'm a horse pulling a cart role. Like it seems, it seems like it's got that war chariot thing going on now.
It's a divisive change for some people. Half a playtest thought this was the coolest thing ever, and the other half of playtest is like, I think they wanted a cheaper Zephyr to apply ionization. But I think this is the cooler, more fun option at the end of the day, for sure.
Also, ionization probably shouldn't be just automatic in that faction,
No,
right? You should have
work
to.
for it.
You're paying
Or
for
pay
it.
for it, yeah.
Okay. Anything else about January update or army changes before we move on to this last segment?
I think
Sorry about that.
we've gone on enough of a tangent there, probably.
Yeah.
We got.
All right.
We wrung enough spoilers out of the towel. Let's go.
Yeah, thank you for sharing all that with us. That's awesome. So our next couple questions come from Patreon. The first question, I know we've talked about the myth, the man, the legend himself, Big Pig. So this question comes from Eric. What are some pending changes proposed for this model?
Okay. So this was one of those models that were iterated a lot. Not because it was necessarily difficult to know what to do with him. We had lots of ideas, but it was because finding that balance between too nerfed and not nerfed enough, right? So you will see it's Rat 6 now. The volley weapon count is 2, but it's only rate of fire 1. So each gun is only going to get to shoot once. Now, unless you spend Fury, because he has reload 1, which is the big change. So
up to 4 shots, but you have to pay for 2 of them.
Yep. So either you're getting volume or you're getting power. Is the trade-off. Now that range of 10 there is to kind of force him to be close enough to engage. We want him closer to the fight, so that's why he lost 2 inches of range. But I believe he picked up that Rat 6, so he's more accurate, so the shots matter more.
That's just a change log doing you in there, Loren. The Rat's currently 6. It's because at one point we tweaked the range of the Rat, sorry, and then it got tweaked back.
It got tweaked back. Yeah, okay, that is doing me dirty. Sorry, not to scare people. He's still Rat 6 then. But his accuracy is still good because he's got volume fire. So
Gotcha. How about any changes to Carver?
Nothing to Carver himself.
Nope. Okay.
We still wanted him to be hard to take off the table because he's a very expensive package. So
I've been surprised a couple times at his spell accuracy, nailing stuff to the wall a couple times where I'm just like, oh no.
No one expects the torment, man. No one expects the torment behind the house.
Slinging torments.
That was one of the changes we looked at, dropping his AAT by 1. But ultimately, we didn't want to nerf it too much. So we mostly focused on the boar because the boar was the actual problem. But he's still providing eyeless sight, so don't worry about that. Everyone's got
He still sounds like a good gun platform. Like even with those changes, I still see him having a place in.
Yeah, the variability of him was hard, I'm sure, to balance, just because like if you do get 5 or 6 shots, like you could boost damage on 5 or 6 shots, and that's just an immense amount of output.
His Fury needed to be that high because Carver's Fury was that high, right? He needed to be able to fuel his boss, but he needed to pay for actual use of it on himself, I think, a bit more, which is why he picked up Reload.
So next question, we have a 2-parter from Brian. Can we expect big changes to House Callus? I know we've been over quite a few of them already.
We've been over one big one.
Yeah, and did Necrofactorium come out as you planned?
So Necrofactorium probably saw the least amount of changes. I'll start there because that's the easiest question. We carteled one thing that was one caster that was a little bit of a problem in the slightest tweak of a way. Subsera's feet, the range she can drop the models is a little lower. But and then we did an interesting thing. We didn't necessarily feel like we needed to change the Furies, but one of the biggest feedbacks we got from the player base was that they're very complicated and that they're very hard to tell who's who. So the biggest change we did there is that they're all exactly the same now. So you don't have to worry about who's who. They lost Battle Wizard, they lost Wailing, but all of them gained Mortal Fear. Just straight up. They don't have to do an action for it. Just Mortal Fear all the time.
Wow.
So, and then some other things got shifted around so that their abilities were identical. So they do exactly the same thing, more or less, that you were using them for. but it's much simpler, and you don't have to like who's who. What's the accounting is gone basically.
Mm-hmm. I have such a hard time keeping them straight. I had a fun play with Bugatti Bomb the other day. Right, I walked up and boosted a fire step into all three of them and just erased them from the board.
Fantastic.
Boosted power 15s, just say leave, please. I don't care what you do anymore.
I love it. Awesome. The other half of that question was changes to Dusk. I think we covered that. Do we need to go any further on that? How do we feel?
Just I suppose we could just mention that there are further changes there, and we've kind of covered the biggest one there in Syrafel. There's a couple of other bits and pieces, and they're not just nerfs. I think there was some people sort of general consensus was that the House Callus just needed just nerfs, but that's not entirely true. There is a good swathe of nerfs and buffs across the faction to just try and change people's pick rates for certain models.
Yep. I guess we won't go any deeper on that. People will see it in a couple days here. So
this question comes from Joe, Tyrants on the Field, shout out, North American War Table League. So we did talk about Storm Legion a little bit already. So his question is within regards to their competitiveness in a Steamroller environment. So Joe asked, Storm Legion had several changes in 2024, including the removal of Desperate Pace and the reworking of Athena's Feet. Over the course of the year, competitively speaking, players saw a major reduction in the efficiency and effectiveness of the army. What is being done to help lift Storm Legion back into the competitive arena in 2025?
Cool. So, multi-step process here. First off, we did see that, and we are addressing it. Don't worry. We got you. Overall, playtesters think they're in a much better place than they were previously, and I would agree. Dev wholeheartedly agrees with that. They saw some. I'll front load this. They saw a little bit of nerfs in the Stormcallers because that was limiting choices. But other models, the Tempest models, got better. Calder got better with her feet affecting more things than just her battle group in certain ways. Huxley got way better. I just want to say he picked up an old favorite ability from Cray. Hint, hint. Striker saw some rework. Lots happened, and they're going to be in a much better place than they were. Oh, I almost forgot. I buried the lead. Also, Electrify got changed so it works on model unit. So they have a way to buff the damage of their infantry now more reliably. Not just positive charge. Yep.
Not just positive charge now.
Last question coming from Joe. I know we talked about Windstorm and Dust Devil. Are there any other plans to address any of the range reduction abilities or spells, or do we hit them all?
I think we hit them all in the discussion here. We definitely did curtail a lot of them in the worst offenders. We stopped the stacking where it was important. But we do think range reduction is a key method of balancing melee and range. And while it shouldn't be shutting down range entirely, we do think it is in a much better balanced place right now.
There is one additional note to range reduction abilities that we haven't addressed yet, which is it's a smaller one. So it's on Warping Winds, which is that it's changed to friendly faction. So it's no longer just friendly models anymore. So it won't affect your other kind of like Victuses and the War, Big Pig, etc. So it's just friendly faction.
Can I just ask a follow up to that? So is that sort of a unifying theme that we can expect to see in 2025, where a lot of these friendly spells or abilities are starting to move more into that friendly faction arena and not so ambiguous to all models?
I would say it's more case by case. Because Mercenary is a cool model that we like, and we'd like you to play with them, and we do want to encourage the use of those miniatures. But I guess case by case interactions that we felt were getting a little bit too much are the ones that we've curbed. So it's more of that than across the board.
Yeah, like for example, the models that you'll see that can go in every army. It's much harder to balance those, and I feel like in some parts, Big Pig was more of a problem because we couldn't account for all the different. Yeah, he's in every army, right? And so we missed some of the worst interactions early on. And we learned from that, and I think we need to be careful with, we don't want unshootable Big Pig, right? And so now that has to be friendly faction, right?
No more unshootable Big Pig.
Yeah. So yeah, like Jamie said, it's definitely case by case.
The first time I saw him with Zakar, and he's like effectively armor 27, I'm like, oh no, this is a problem.
All right, well, that wraps up all of our questions. Jamie, Loren, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, this is so much fun. And it's been a minute since we've had you on. And Jamie, welcome.
bit.
Hopefully, yeah, we'll have you guys back anytime. You're welcome. All right, so are there any closing statements? Any cons you guys are going to? Anything exciting? Trips, War Machine related for next year? And Jamie, we'll start with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, firstly, thank you for having me on. It's been a pleasure. So you can usually find me in the SFG Discord, where I'll be happily talking to folks about all various different games that we work on, as well as War Machine. I'll sometimes hang out in some of the fan Discords, but I'm probably a little bit less active in those. You can see me in person at Adepticon. I'll be over there this year, helping to run the events and work at the booth as well. Looking forward to that. It's been a while since I've been to Adepticon, so super excited for that. And I'll be attending a number of other sort of UK events around the year as well. I tend to go to the Welsh Masters, and I'm seeing what kind of events I can get to in the EU, but can't be everywhere at once. So, but yeah, I'll be around.
As for me, again, thank you for having me on. But I'm also in the SFG Discord. Mostly fill in the role of answering questions, but don't be afraid to at me if you have questions or want to know something. I'm pretty easygoing. I don't think I'm coming to any conventions anytime soon, but I hopefully will see people at local events. I do show up at local events now and then in the Seattle area, so let me know. If they're there, I'll show up.
And we'll go ahead and add a link to SFG's Discord in the show notes below. That way you can join the Discord and all the great conversations going on. So Andy and I, our convention kickoff is going to be Captain Con. It is my first time going. I'm so excited. I've heard nothing but good things. So we're road tripping up there with Rick. Should be fun. And we'll also be at Adepticon. So I look forward to finally meeting you and your team in person, Jamie. And it should be a good time. But yeah, we wanted to thank everybody for listening, hanging out. Thank you for all the snippets and sneak peek behind the curtain.
Yeah.
So excited for next year. You had some bangers in 2024, so I'm very excited for 25.
We look forward to keep continuing this bangers going on as far as in the future. So
Thanks for coming on, guys. Really appreciate you chatting and spoiling all kinds of stuff.
And,
yeah.
Happy holidays, happy New Year to everybody, and we'll see you in 2025.
Happy holidays.